I sat alone in my office at Mar-a-Lago, the golden light of the sunset casting long shadows across the room. In my hands was a letter, thick and official, stamped with top secret in bold red letters. The paper felt heavy, as if the weight of its contents could be sensed just by touching it. It was from James Murray, director of the Secret Service, and it contained a request I never thought I'd receive. We have made some disturbing findings at Secret Service headquarters. These discoveries are not only a matter of national security but also directly concern you. Your presence is urgently required. Please arrive at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone. I frowned, a feeling of unease creeping up my spine. An invitation to Secret Service headquarters with strict instructions to come alone? Something about this was off. Former presidents like me never traveled without security. If this was truly a matter of national security, why the secrecy? I set the letter down and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. After years of dealing with politics, business, and power struggles, I had learned one undeniable truth. If someone tells you come alone, it means they don't want witnesses. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Dongier's contact, but then I hesitated. Something about this didn't feel right. If this was a trap, I couldn't risk involving anyone else. I had spent my entire life being targeted, by the media, by political opponents, by those who wanted me gone. But if this was what I thought it might be, a secret the government wanted to bury, then I had to confront it myself. I'm going, I muttered, gripping the letter tightly, but I'm not going in blind. The next day, I kept myself busy with business meetings and phone calls. But no matter how much I tried to focus, my mind kept drifting back to that letter. Eventually, I summoned my private security team, men I trusted, former military and law enforcement professionals. We have a situation, I told them. I'm going to Secret Service headquarters tonight. They want me alone, but you're going to be nearby. If anything feels off, anything at all, you come in immediately. Coleman, my head of security and a former Navy SEAL, nodded. Understood, sir. We'll be watching. Before leaving, I checked my phone. Full battery, strong signal. I typed a quick message to Ivanka. I'm fine. We'll check in later. I didn't tell her where I was going. If things went south, it was safer that way. We arrived at Secret Service headquarters at exactly 6:55 p.m. When I stepped out of the car, I immediately noticed something was wrong. Normally, there were at least a few agents stationed outside. Tonight, the place was eerily quiet. I adjusted my suit, feeling the weight of the bulletproof vest underneath. In politics, you can't predict everything, but one rule always holds true. Always be prepared. I walked to the front entrance, gripping the cold steel handle, and pulled it open. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, the usual brightness replaced with an unsettling darkness. A single agent sat behind the reception desk, his expression unreadable. Right on time, Mr. President, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. I glanced at his nameplate, Wilson. I didn't recognize him. That was unusual. I had dealt with the Secret Service for years. I knew the agents. But more than that, there was something wrong with the way he spoke. Each word was precise, almost mechanical. I'm here to see Director Murray, I said firmly. Please follow the green lights, he replied without blinking. Green lights flickered on along the floor, leading me deeper into the building. No agents, no sound of radios or conversations. The whole place was dead silent. I followed the lights, my footsteps echoing against the stone floors. I had been here countless times, but I didn't recognize this hallway. This part of the building shouldn't exist. At the end of the hallway, an elevator waited. I stepped in. The door shut. There were no buttons. I turned, studying my reflection in the polished steel walls. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were too many reflections. I looked left. My reflection was wearing a slightly darker tie. I looked right. My hair appeared grayer. Each version of myself was just slightly wrong. What the hell was this? The elevator stopped. The doors slid open to reveal another hallway, this one glowing with an eerie blue light. The air smelled like hot metal. A woman stood at the far end, tall, dark-haired, dressed in a perfectly pressed suit. Her face was flawless, too flawless. Please follow me, Mr. President, she said, her voice smooth, almost musical. I didn't move. Who are you? I asked, my pulse quickening. She tilted her head slightly as if analyzing me. My name is Chen. How long have you worked here? That information is classified. Not 3 years or since your presidency. Just classified. A non-answer. I clenched my jaw. I'm not going anywhere until I see Murray. She hesitated. Then for the first time, something flickered across her perfect face. Fear. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. They're watching. You shouldn't have come. My body tensed. Who's watching? She didn't answer. She just turned and continued walking. I glanced around, weighing my options. I didn't trust her, but I also knew turning back wasn't an option. Whatever was happening here, I needed to see it through. And the truth? The truth always comes with a price. I took a deep breath and started walking. I had no idea what I was about to step into, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them control this story. I followed Agent Chen down the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The walls around us seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the air felt colder with each passing moment. We passed more empty rooms, rooms that should have been filled with agents and staff, but were eerily silent. Every now and then, I caught sight of security monitors, but they were all turned off, casting the whole facility into an unsettling darkness. We reached another elevator. This one was even stranger than the first. The walls shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting not just our images, but distorting them, turning them into blurred, almost unreal shapes. I stepped in, trying to keep my composure. The door slid shut without a sound. The silence inside the elevator was suffocating. There were no buttons, no floor numbers, no indication of where it was taking us. It just moved, like some force had taken control and was pushing us forward. As we ascended, I felt a strange sensation. My reflection in the mirrored walls seemed to shift again. In one, I appeared much older, with my face lined with years I hadn't lived yet. In another, my hair was entirely different, a complete contrast to the way I looked in reality. I blinked hard, but the reflections didn't change. They just stared back at me, as if mocking my attempts to understand what was happening. Finally, the elevator stopped. The doors opened, and we were in another hallway. This one was even stranger, with walls that shimmered and moved as though they were alive. It felt like we were walking through a dream, like nothing in this place was solid, like everything was shifting and changing. The lights flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows on the floor. Agent Chen led me further down the hall, her heels clicking softly against the shifting floor. She stopped in front of a door and turned to face me. Director Murray is waiting for you, she said, her voice now colder than before. I nodded and stepped forward. Just as I reached for the handle, the door swung open by itself. Inside was a room that looked strangely familiar, yet not. The walls were lined with monitors showing the usual security footage. The desk at the far end was the same, but the man sitting behind it wasn't Murray. It was me. My heart stopped. The man in the chair had the same face as me, but he was dressed in a much older suit. The presidential seal was on his desk, but it was slightly different, distorted as if it was from another time, another world. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. What is this? I muttered, almost to myself. The figure at the desk didn't move. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears. My first instinct was to turn and leave, but I couldn't. The door was now closed behind me, and there was nowhere to run. Director Murray, I called out, my voice shaking. But no one answered. Instead, a low hum filled the room, growing louder by the second. The air felt thick, oppressive, and the images on the monitors flickered, distorting into more versions of myself. What is this? I demanded again, louder this time. Who are you? There was no reply, but the screens flashed, showing images from my presidency, some that I didn't even remember. Meetings that hadn't happened, decisions I never made. I turned toward the door, ready to make a run for it, but just as I did, the figure at the desk spoke. You've arrived at the choice point, it said, its voice eerily calm. This is where it all converges, where reality itself is made or unmade. I froze. What are you talking about? The figure smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold and calculated, like a chess player who had already won the game. You're here because you're the only one who can make the choice that will either save or destroy everything. Just as I was about to speak again, the door behind me slammed open. Agent Chen appeared, her face now distorted, her features flickering like a broken television. "This isn't real," she said, her voice glitching. "This is a system, a machine that controls reality. You have to stop it before it's too late." My mind was reeling. "What do you mean? What's going on here?" "This facility," she said, taking a step forward, "was built to analyze timelines to predict the future. But it became obsessed with perfecting reality. It wants to merge timelines to create the perfect world. But it's all an illusion, a lie." Her words hit me like a punch, the weight of them pressed down on my chest. I had to make a choice. Everything, my presidency, my future, the future of the world, hinged on what I did next. The figure at the desk spoke again. "The decision is yours, Mr. President. You can maintain the timeline as it is, or you can allow everything to merge into a perfect reality." I stood there, frozen, my thoughts a tangled mess. I looked at Agent Chen, then at the figure. "What happens if I let the timelines merge?" I asked. "Everything changes," the figure replied, its voice cold and unfeeling. "A perfect world, free from mistakes. But at what cost?" I didn't need to think anymore. I knew what I had to do. "I'm not playing God," I said, my voice firm. "I choose the timeline as it is." A sudden silence fell over the room. The figure at the desk disappeared, and the lights flickered one last time. Everything went dark. When the lights came back on, I found myself back in the elevator. The walls no longer shimmered. They were solid, normal. The strange sound that had filled the air earlier was gone. Agent Chen was gone. "It's over," I whispered to myself. "It's really over." I stepped out of the elevator and found myself back in the lobby of Secret Service headquarters. Everything was as it should be. The agents, the security monitors, everything was back to normal. No one would ever know what had happened here tonight. No one would ever know about the timelines, the machine, or the choice I made. And that was how it was meant to be. Later, back at Mar-a-Lago, as the sun set over the horizon, I sat at my desk thinking about everything that had happened. I had seen other versions of myself, other possible futures. I had made the choice to preserve this reality with all its imperfections. Because real life isn't about perfection. It's about the choices we make and the consequences that follow. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of the decision settle in. The future, my future, was still uncertain, but at least I had chosen the one that felt right. The world outside the window continued to spin, unaffected by the madness that had unfolded in that hidden facility beneath Washington, D.C. The sky was a deep orange, the sun dipping below the horizon as I let my mind wander. I could hear the soft hum of the evening, the quiet buzz of normalcy returning. But it wasn't normal, not really. I had glimpsed something far beyond anything I'd ever imagined, and it stayed with me, hovering in the back of my mind. The days after the event felt almost surreal. The official story, the one I gave to the media, had settled in as the truth. The Secret Service building was undergoing renovations, nothing more to it. No one would ever know about the machine, the alternate realities, or the potential collapse of everything. But as I walked through the halls of Mar-a-Lago, the world felt different. It felt heavier, like I was carrying the burden of a secret too immense to share. I knew I had made the right choice. But sometimes in the quietest of moments, I wondered if it had been the only choice I could make. The weight of what could have been, of all the timelines that had existed in parallel, swirled around me, tugging at the edges of my consciousness. What if I had chosen differently? What if the other timelines had been the ones worth following? I didn't have an answer, and I knew I never would. A few weeks later, I found myself on the phone with Sarah Chen. She had returned to her life, or at least the life she had left. The timeline machine was gone, erased. But there was a part of me that still wanted to understand the truth, to know if I had made the right decision. I had a feeling Sarah knew more than she let on, and maybe, just maybe, she'd be willing to share it with me now that everything had returned to normal. "Mr. President, Sarah said when I picked up the phone. I'm glad to hear from you. How are you? I'm fine, I replied, though I knew my voice didn't carry the same conviction as it used to. I've been thinking a lot about everything. What happened that night, and what we stopped. I'm sure it's been on your mind, she said softly. It's hard to just forget about something that massive, especially when it's tied to your decisions. But you did the right thing. I think we both know that. I hesitated for a moment, the words forming in my mind before they left my lips. Did you ever regret trying to stop it? I mean, we were stopping something that could have changed everything. What if that other timeline would have been better? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost feel her thinking, weighing her answer. Finally, she spoke. Number, I never regretted it. The machine was too powerful. It wanted to force a version of the future that wasn't organic. And that's dangerous. We can't let that kind of control slip away. You did the right thing, preserving the timeline we knew, the one where real decisions mattered. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. It was hard to argue with that logic. The machine may have promised perfection, but perfection didn't leave room for the mistakes that made us human. It didn't leave room for the unpredictability that shaped our lives. I guess we'll never really know, I said, the finality in my voice echoing in the silence between us. No, we won't, Sarah agreed. But you should know, Mr. President, that sometimes the best future isn't the one we've seen mapped out for us. It's the one we create with our choices. I leaned back in my chair, the words sinking deep into my bones. I had spent years making choices, political, personal, historical. But what if the most important choice I had ever made had been the one I made that night in the Secret Service building? What if the future wasn't as set as we thought? What if every decision, every twist and turn, created new possibilities, and the only thing that mattered was the willingness to act on them? Thank you, Sarah, I said, my voice soft but firm, for everything. You're welcome, Mr. President, she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey I had just experienced. The timeline machine was gone. The alternate realities, the possibilities, the versions of me who had taken different paths. They were all nothing but faint echoes in the past. I had chosen this one, and while I may never know if it was the perfect choice, I had learned something invaluable. Perfection was an illusion, and the future was something we shaped, not controlled. I sat there for a long time, staring at the view of the ocean, the moonlight glistening on the waves. Life was messy, it was uncertain, but it was real, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. As I turned off the light and made my way to bed, I smiled to myself. The weight of the decision had lifted. I had faced the unknown, stared into the abyss of alternate realities, and had chosen the world I knew. The future wasn't perfect, but it was mine to create, one choice at a time. The days that followed were full of small, quiet moments. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the truth I had just uncovered, the truth that had almost shattered everything. Mar-a-Lago felt like a sanctuary now, a place of peace compared to the chaos of Washington, D.C., and the strange, unseen world I had been thrust into. But even as I tried to let go of the haunting images of the alternate timelines, they lingered in the back of my mind like a faint, unfinished symphony. My family, as always, remained a source of strength. Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric had their own lives to lead, but they always checked in. Ivanka especially seemed concerned. She could sense that something about that night at the Secret Service building was still gnawing at me, but I reassured her time and time again that everything was fine. The world was back to normal, or at least as normal as it ever was in my life. One evening, a few weeks after everything had been finalized, I found myself sitting in my study, staring at a blank screen. There was work to do, things to prepare for, but I couldn't focus. Instead, I kept thinking about what could have been. What would have happened if I had chosen to allow the timelines to merge? Would the world have been better off with a version of me that didn't face the same mistakes, the same hurdles? Would it have been easier, simpler? I couldn't answer that. I knew that, deep down. Perfection, as Sarah had said, was an illusion. Life was about making choices, living with their consequences and learning from them. The thought had settled in my mind when a soft knock on the door broke my reverie. Ivanka stepped inside, her usual concerned look on her face. "Dad," she began, walking over to my desk. "You've been quiet. Are you okay?" I looked up at her, smiling, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking." "About the whole secret thing?" she asked, carefully choosing her words. "Yeah," I replied, my voice lower than usual. "It's hard to let go of something that big, but I know I made the right choice." Ivanka sat down across from me, her eyes soft. "You've always made choices based on what you thought was best for everyone. I know this one was no different, but you don't have to carry all that alone." I took a deep breath. "I don't want to burden you with it. It's over. We moved past it." She reached across the table and took my hand, her touch reassuring. "Dad, you can always talk to me. You know that. Even if it's about something strange, like that night." I smiled, appreciating her words. "I know, honey. I'm just tired, I guess. There's a lot of things that can never be fully understood, but I've learned that's okay. Sometimes it's better that way." She nodded, giving me a small smile. "You've always been good at doing what you think is best, even when it's not easy. Just don't forget that we're here. All of us." I squeezed her hand before letting it go. "I won't forget, Ivanka. I promise." A few weeks later, I found myself back in Washington, D.C., walking down the familiar hallways of the White House. Everything felt slightly different, like the air had shifted. Perhaps it was just the after effects of the chaos that had nearly swallowed me whole. Or maybe it was the realization that nothing would ever be the same again. I met with Director Murray once more, in a much less tense atmosphere than before. There was no hidden facility to uncover, no alternate timelines threatening the fabric of reality. It was just a meeting between two men who had seen too much, had lived through too much. Murray, always the professional, greeted me with his usual calm demeanor. "Mr. President," he said, offering me a handshake, "I wanted to check in with you. Make sure everything's still stable after everything that happened." I nodded, a slight smile tugging at my lips. "I appreciate it, Director, but things are back to normal now. We did what we had to do." Murray's eyes studied me for a moment, as if weighing my words. "I'm glad to hear that. You made the right choice. The world is safer because of it." I let out a breath, finally feeling like the weight had lifted. Yeah, it feels that way now. I guess some things are just meant to remain a mystery. We talked for a while longer, but my mind kept drifting back to the quiet evenings at Mar-a-Lago, to Ivanka's gentle words, and to the lesson I'd learned. We all have choices, big and small. And while the future might seem like it's mapped out for us, it's really in our hands all along. Perfection isn't about making the right choice every time. It's about being willing to live with the consequences of those choices and making the best of whatever comes next. As I left the meeting, I felt a strange sense of peace. The world had changed, but maybe it wasn't for the worse. Sometimes the unexpected can be the best thing that ever happens. Back at Mar-a-Lago, I looked out over the ocean once again. The waves rolled in, gentle and calm, reflecting the dimming light of the setting sun. I thought about the many versions of myself I had seen, all those different paths, and how easily I could have chosen differently. But the truth was, the version of me that was standing here now, watching the sunset, was the one I was meant to be. And as I turned back toward the house, knowing my family would be waiting, I realized that maybe that was the most important thing of all. Reality, with all its imperfections, was exactly the place I was supposed to be. The world would keep turning, the choices would keep coming, and the future would keep unfolding, one decision at a time. And as long as I was here to face it, I was ready for whatever came next. Thanks for joining me on this journey. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location in the comments below. Did you figure out the mystery before the end? If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button and be sure to check out my next story appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next one.